went at the time. I was in my early teens, or about 11 or 12 years old, and then into my teenage, went with groups of friends to go see certain films. If we saw the logo of Hammer Films, we knew that it was a very special picture. We knew it was a certain kind of film. A surprising experience, usually, and shocking.
In May 1957, a British horror film called The Curse of Frankenstein opened in London. It was to make international stars of Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing.
There came a time when I saw they were doing Frankenstein, a remake after 25 years absence from the screen. And I remember seeing the original with Colin Clive and Boris Karloff. Remember, it was absolutely wonderful. So I knew there was a break coming in my television work, and I said, but what about doing this? It would be a nice one to have a try at. Hammer Films were making 5 pictures a year, and Frankenstein was just one amongst 5, and no one had any idea it would become the incredible success that it was.
A film company, Hammer Films, was looking for a very tall, very big man. And I think they'd learned that I'd done a lot of mime and things like that in the theater in the preceding 10 years, and they wanted somebody who could play a part without speaking, and who was tall and who was big. So for the first time in my career as an actor, these two elements helped me rather than hindered me.
Costing under £70,000, The Curse of Frankenstein was an overnight success and made Hammer a household name. Its producer was Anthony Hines.
Hammer was my father, surprisingly enough. He was a successful businessman and a failed comedian. He failed because he wasn't really very funny. But he and another chap did a double act years ago, a comic double act. And because my father's business was centered in Hammersmith, they called themselves Hammer and Smith. And the name Hammer started from that. And he went into financing films before the war. I don't know why, because he hated films. And during the war, a mutual friend introduced him to someone called Enrique Carreras, who was involved in cinema exhibition and distribution. And together they formed a company called Exclusive Films, which just distributed little short films. And after the war, Enrique's son, Lieutenant Colonel Jim Carreras, came back and joined the firm. And I went to see him, and we seemed to get on right. And he said, why didn't I join? And and they'd just come out of the Air Force, and I really hadn't anything to do. So we got together, and I joined the firm. And it was then just a distribution company. It was handling other people's films. But you have to realize that after the war, there's a tremendous audience for a cinema-going audience in England. People go, they didn't even bother to find out what was on, they just went. If it was terrible, they came out disappointed. If it was good, they came out, but they still went. So anything went. And there was a tremendous boom in film distribution. The trouble was to try and get the films. A chap came along, and we bought the rights of Dick Barton, special agent from the BBC. And he said he'd make this for us for a price. Unfortunately, he didn't think that it entailed his actually remaining in the country. And we got a postcard from Capri saying good luck. And I was left holding the can, so that's how I was thrown in the deep end.
Hammer thrived on adapting popular BBC radio series such as PC-49 and The Lions Family. They also produced mystery thrillers and suspense dramas, often with imported American stars to guarantee money from across the Atlantic. Then, in 1953, a BBC television serial proved an enormous hit with the public.
I saw the first episode of Quatermass on BBC television. I was terribly impressed, and I saw my partner next day and said, watch the second episode, because this is good stuff. He saw it, but agreed with me. And we went down to the BBC, and we made a deal that they accepted. I think it was, we said we're split 50-50. I think it was straightforward. They were better than anybody else had offered. And that's how we started doing the Quatermass films.
From out of this world it came, a horrifying terror that threatened mankind, haunting and possessing every human being within range. An indestructible danger beyond all earthly understanding.
I watched him die a few hours ago in that plant, his whole body covered with some kind of corrosive poisoning, eaten away.
It poisoned everything it touched. The mind and the body of man was no longer in his control. They ran from this unknown menace, but there was no escape.
With the success of Quatermass, Hammer had discovered an eager audience for the revival of a celebrated movie monster.
An American, I can't remember his name, came to my partner with the idea of remaking Frankenstein. But he wanted a lot of money for it, I think. It was going to be he was going to be involved and wanted a lot of money. And my partner told me this, and I pointed out to him that since Mary Shelley had written it, over 100 years ago, it was hardly in any form of copyright. It was in public domain and nobody owned it. So he went back and saw the American. The next thing I know, the deal had been settled, obviously much better terms, and we're to make Frankenstein, at least I am. And I'm given a script, which I didn't really like. It was rather boring, and it's a sort of rehash of the old. But anyway, we were going to do it. And then, to my secret delight, my partner's horror, we found that Universal were waiting with a writ behind their backs. Because if we put in anything that was in their film that wasn't in the original book or wasn't original of ours, they'd have served an injunction and the film would have been banned. So we had to make a film that was entirely different from the first one. Well, then it became fun.
Fun for the producer, perhaps, but not so much for one of the stars.
The makeup was quite horrendous, is no other word for it, and it was very much hit and miss between myself and the makeup men concerned, because we were not allowed to copy the universal makeup that Boris Karloff wore because of the question of copyright. So I really looked at somebody, quite like you said, like a road accident. It was also excessively uncomfortable, and it was almost impossible for me to eat or drink, and naturally there weren't many people prepared to sit down and eat and drink with me.
This thing must be destroyed before it regains consciousness. Do you hear me, Victor?
What, Paul? What did you say?
You must destroy this thing now.
Paul, don't you see? I succeeded.
Succeeded, yes, nearly succeeded in getting yourself killed. Another 10 seconds and you would have...
This was my creation.
It seemed that when we saw Curse of Frankenstein, there was a graphic quality to it that was totally uncalled for, which made it extremely endearing to us. We enjoyed it a great deal. And I'll never forget the audience's reaction that midnight showing at the New York Paramount. They loved it. They loved it. We were about 15 years old, I think, my friends and myself. And then I think the better of the two, the film that we really felt went further, was The Horror of Dracula. You know, there's nothing like the introduction of Dracula in that picture, where he simply walks down the stairs and walks over to Jonathan Harker and says, "Hello, I'm Dracula."